Hi, everyone. Welcome to Summer Special number 4 of Bees and Reverie Radio, a podcast about pollinators, native plants, and how you can help biodiversity from your own backyard. I'm Emily Wayland, and LaDonna is still on break. But today, I am joined by two former guests, Rich Lund of Mr. Lund Science on YouTube and Dr. Annie Purcell of Hot Mess Ranch. It is the middle of quote-unquote monarch season, and all three of us rear monarchs to some capacity. Today's topic is, should we or shouldn't we rear monarchs? And since it's a very divided topic and it comes up every year as more people enter the hobby or try their hand as a citizen scientist, I wanted to talk about that today. So welcome back to the show, Annie and Rich. So why don't you remind our audience briefly of who you are, where you're from, how you got into rearing, and anything else you want to kind of talk about in your introduction.
I'm Annie Purcell, and I live in Northeast Texas. I am into rearing monarchs because I am directly in both migration paths in the fall and spring. I get most of my caterpillars in the fall, in September, between September and October. And I have always liked the monarchs. I grew up on a ranch in Central Texas where there was just milkweed forever, and that was one thing we just did in the summer was go hunt for caterpillars. But since we moved out to this property 4 years ago and started a ranch, we're really focusing on sustainable ranching. Ranching and housing development both take out a lot of habitats for pollinators, and so we are trying to balance the need we have as humans for ranching and food production with nature and trying to we have about 55 acres. Much of it is wooded, and we have pasture land, but then we also have native land where we try to increase the native plants for pollinators. We're trying to get rid of a lot of the invasive species that have been here because people, ranched this land before us and brought in native invasive grasses and things. So that's kind of our mission. And my husband is more on the ranching side, and I am more on the habitat restoration.
Gardening and conservation?
Yeah.
Oh, okay,
So that is where I come in. We've only lived here for a little over 4 years. As a kid, rearing monarchs, it was, a stick in a jar. It wasn't really scientific, but I'm trying to learn and grow as much as I can and do the best I can because I feel like we've caused this problem for monarchs, and so we need to do what we can to help repair the harm we've done.
Well, that's great, and I definitely share that with you. What about you, Rich?
So my name's Rich Lund, and I'm a high school science teacher who my passion for monarchs really birthed out of Science Olympiad, preparing for some entomology events that we were going to be competing in. That's when I got to learn a bit about the play of the monarch butterflies. I say a bit because since learning a bit about it, I've learned there's a whole lot more complexity to it. But I, at the time, had started a YouTube channel to just kind of show some science demonstrations to my students on days where they're absent. But in learning about the monarch butterfly, found some information that wasn't as comprehensive online, and then decided to try to make something more comprehensive if others want to get involved, and to try to also have the focus on the message be not just about the idea of raising monarchs as far as rearing them at home, but to also look at the idea of habitat restoration and what it really would take to solve this problem long term to reach a sustainable population. And that really is the restoration of habitat. So I made some videos. It became a bit more popular than expected. It was really kind of just meant to stoke my Science Olympiad team into the entomology event, but they became something a bit more popular online. And with the questions that were coming my way, I realized that there was more a reason to have purpose for more episodes that could address a lot of these questions on what their plight was and what all the different avenues kind of are of it. So I've tried to kind of do that while juggling teaching at the same time.
Sure, absolutely. And for those of you who are new to the show and aren't familiar with my background, I work in marketing during the day, so I definitely am not any sort of entomologist or scientist, but I am a nature enthusiast. And I always loved it as a kid. I always reared them with my dad growing up, but I got back into it in adulthood, kind of over a sense of nostalgia. And I tried saving, or I entered it with the wrong mindset. I tried to save every life that I could find, and that didn't work out, especially when I had them constantly dying one summer. And once I learned more about the science of it and the diseases that I had no idea about, I kind of learned what the purpose behind rearing was for me and what it should be at a larger scale. And working in a technology space, I personally feel as though society's become very removed from nature. And so I wanted to kind of bring nature back to people through social media. And that's kind of the short version of why I do what I do online. So obviously, we all rear to some capacity. But so, we've all, three of us have heard the arguments for and against. And obviously, today's question is, should we or shouldn't we rear monarchs? It is a very divided question in the scientific community and among nature enthusiasts. And I don't think one way is necessarily more wrong than the other, but I think it's important to talk about the different pros and cons about it. And these are just basic ones that I'm going to list before we start our discussion so that you as the listener can kind of think about where you might fall. So arguments for it is that it spreads awareness and education to help monarchs and plant native habitat. It brings people closer to nature. It leads people to plant milkweed and create native habitats, which I obviously mentioned before. And because monarchs are so iconic and a favorite among so many people, when we work to protect them, we do end up protecting all pollinators because a net positive for them is a net positive for all pollinators. It does increase the chance of an egg making it to adulthood. I know that there's some questions of survival of fittest over this, but if you take in 10 eggs, those eggs have a better chance of making it to adulthood in captivity than in the wild, simply because their habitat has been reduced and they're very vulnerable to predators out there. So, like, whether or not survival of the fittest is a factor here, that is a fact. Remove those factors and threats, they will make it to adulthood. And it also allows regular people to participate in some really cool citizen science programs like tagging and monitoring projects, like larva monitoring. And as far as the arguments against it, health is a concern, especially with OE and other diseases, especially in the southern United States. And rearing is not the main way to save them. Planting milkweed and habitat is. So when people try to save too many lives, that's not necessarily the best way to go about it. The reason to their decline is mainly habitat loss. Rearing too many at once can cause crowding and hygiene issues. Monarchs typically are laid one egg per plant, and sometimes when you're rearing in home captive conditions, people will try to put multiples in a enclosure, and that's not very natural. That's not how that's normally set up. So there are some things that can happen with that. There are questions about their migratory ability being raised in captivity. Are people cleaning their enclosures well enough? And I think the main argument against it is that nature knows best. Humans should not interfere. So those are just some basic ones. And we're obviously going to touch on all of these as we talk today. But let's go ahead and get started. So we all rear monarchs, as I've mentioned 3 times. What is your overall reason and argument for doing so? Annie, would you like to start?
Sure. As like being directly in the migration path, I feel like it's kind of my mission to make sure that in the spring, as many eggs as possible get hatched and raised to adulthood to continue the species, and then in the fall, so as many possible can make it to Mexico to start over again. So I really don't rear during the summer. I just, like I said, I focused on habitat restoration on our property and have tons of milkweed everywhere. I just let them do their thing during the summer and really focus on spring and fall. That's when I see the biggest concentration anyway, but I really focus on the fall because in my garden and my space, all nature is welcome. So I have, I'm happy to see spiders, wasps, bees, butterflies, anything, but I have witnessed ants and wasps eat those poor little caterpillars like a corn dog, and it's traumatic. And like I said earlier, I just feel like we owe it to them because they survived for so long before we came along and ruined everything. So that's my main focus is the migration. I also am a first grade teacher, and the fall is the perfect time for me to bring some to my classroom. To, the kids, that's the perfect age for them to get so excited and they care so much. And for the rest of the year, anytime they see any orange butterfly, they say, "Oh, that's her favorite butterfly."
Yeah.
It's not a monarch, they just see orange butterfly and think that, and it reminds it. So that's another big thing, that if I can make them care, and maybe when they grow up they'll be nostalgic, like you said, and want to help. And so that's just my little contribution. My main priority is restoring habitat, but I also want to give them a leg up on their migrations.
Awesome. And what about you, Rich?
Well, first, I just want to say thank you, Annie, for doing that, because I didn't have an experience with a teacher with monarchs, but through what I've done, sometimes friends, kids, they wanted me to bring over, like, hey, we have some caterpillars. My kid wants to raise a monarch, and so some of my friends' kids have gotten to really see that, and you can really see how captivating an impression it is. How much of an impression it really can set with a kid, and it's something then that is like it catalyzes really a love for ecology, I think, because it's showing you so much how ecology is right there in your backyard. It's something that you can learn about a life cycle of an animal and fall in love with that animal right there, just from what you have available to you already. And so it's something where the monarch knows no barriers of demographics or income levels. It's been a land wherever there's some milkweed. If you plant it, they will come. So thanks definitely for doing that. But if the question is being asked for, like, what's my argument for doing so? What's my argument for rearing monarchs? I don't know if, I guess I would first question, do I need to have an argument for doing it any more than do I need an argument for any kind of hobby, provided I'm doing it responsibly?
Right.
If it's something that you get enjoyment from, benefit from, be it personal, be it getting a chance to show a son or daughter, hey, this is something cool, I want to show you that I did when I was a kid too, and getting to pass on that torch and just teach about the environment. I don't know if we need an argument to do it. If there's times where, like, somebody wishes to question, do you think it's something that could cause harm in doing it? There certainly are some ways to do it wrong that could. So it's like any other hobby. If any kind of safety level is involved, doing it with proper precautions, proper equipment. If it's a hobby, I don't know if I need an argument for doing it, other than I truly enjoy it. But these days, when it comes to what monarchs I'm taking in, I'm selective as to what I'm doing that for. If I'm out in the field and I see a monarch that's made it to third instar and there's plenty of milkweed nearby, yep, I'm going to keep letting it do its thing. But quite often these days, if I'm taking in some milkweed, or if I'm taking in some eggs, it's usually because I found some milkweed where this is popping up in a gas station parking lot, right in the mulch where it's going to get pulled soon. And hey, just so happens, yep, there's an egg on there. So I'm not going to look at that egg and say, well, survival of the fittest. Good luck in this parking lot. See if you can adapt. Because they've been here for millions of years before us, and now we are here. Things have changed, and we're building parking lots, and we're cutting down a whole lot of their habitat. So, already just kind of looking at the argument of nature knows best. Well, nature didn't account for a Snelco station. Not trying to harsh that one. That's just the most recent one where I found an egg, and so no one's gonna have that argument of why I shouldn't take that egg and rear it at home, when I can point at that one and say, like, yeah, that one's doomed, and it's not an adaptive situation here. If I saw a puppy drowning, I'm not gonna be like, well, nature knows best on this one. I'm gonna probably try to save that puppy. So that's what I kind of do these days too.
Yeah, I'm pretty similar in my approach. Like, I pretty much only collect from my own garden because, of course, if I see them, they're coming inside. I know how many earwigs are in my garden, and there's way too many this summer. They will eat them. So if I see those, I bring them in. I also frequent there's like a vacant lot near auto dealership in my small town that frequently gets mowed. So I will go there to collect and save what I can before they are doomed, as you said. So I do the same thing. I used to try to, set myself with a ballpark number, but I found that it really kind of hurts them if you try to make it all about numbers in a way, because I feel like and we can talk about this later too, but like, so when I started doing this and sharing it online, a lot of people are very fascinated by how many I rear when I don't think it matters that much. Um, for me, it's about, making sure that people know about them, how to rear responsibly, and all. And there's many ways that one could do that, right? But also, like, I have learned so much from observing them in my own capacity. Like, I think with it can come a return to critical thinking and learning for yourself and appreciation of science in a time where intellectualism and science is being attacked. So if you can observe nature in a way that you learn and return to this place of critical thought, I think that's the best thing for humanity when they interact with nature. So that's like my main reason for doing so. And of course, I restore the habitat as well. So there's been a lot of studies that have come out over the years about monarchs, and one of them in particular, and we talked about this actually off the air before we started recording this episode, but there was a 2019 University of Chicago study where the headlines would read that monarchs lose their migratory ability when they're captive reared. Now, there's more nuance to that, and that was the case in the articles, but I feel like all of us got little messages or comments in our inboxes or are at least aware of that article. So,
a large ripple in the community inboxes and comment sections, I think, in 2019.
Yeah, it went pretty wild, and I feel like it gets reshared every year, I've found. Have any studies that have come out regarding monarchs caused you to change the way you do things when you rear monarchs?
For me, certainly in 2019, when the study came out, I wanted to definitely find out, did we get some stuff wrong? Are there things that, are being shown, especially in the videos I was putting out there, the information I was putting out? Is there some stuff that's critically wrong there? And that was the first thing. If there was some stuff that's just bad or dangerous, I'd want to remove it. And so in delving into what the actual source was, because you read the articles, I would start there as far as let's read a few articles, and they're all just slightly describing some things differently and getting it done a little bit differently and a little bit wrong in some cases. Sometimes misinformation, I wouldn't say any disinformation was out there, nefarious trying to steer us the wrong way. But a lot of just misuse of terms. And if you're writing a science article, that doesn't necessarily mean you're a scientist. You're a journalist who likely has some science background, some science education, we hope, and can use a good discerning eye. But even then, when you're dealing with like a really specific niche field, it's tough to know all the proper terms. You're not just going to wake up on that day with a deadline for an article a couple days later and know the difference between what is a captive wild source reared monarch outdoors versus a captive bred indoor reared monarch. That might just be called captive reared in the article. And there's a major difference between what somebody is doing in those different situations, especially if we're looking at like commercial captive bred reared.
Right. And that was what the study was initially focused on.
Right. And so like, you read these articles, you can already smell like, all right, there's some confusion of information here. Let's go actually to the study. And in reading it, what the study, if I could have, retitled all those different headlines of the news articles,
yes,
the focus I would have had on there is provided reared outdoors, captive reared monarchs retain ability to migrate. And that could have been the focus instead. But in the world of wanting you to click on the alarming headline, it was instead more of a gasp kind of headline that we were clicking on. So in reading that, it was really encouraging because, hey, we learned a lot more. We learned some more things about the monarch butterfly, its physiology, how it works. And from that study, it did seem that, okay, the best things to do is to definitely ensure the most outdoor exposure we can give them in rearing them. And for me, it's always very important to still have a physical barrier between the animal and the environment because of things like the tachinid fly, the wasps. I mean, that's why I'm taking them inside to try to increase their chances. And if we're giving them the most outdoor exposure we can, certainly people want to know, where do you draw the line? When is it enough outdoor exposure that they still can retain the migratory impulse? And we didn't exactly know. But the best that I could do, though, is try to recreate what kind of situations they did in the study that did give them the migratory impulse results and data that they had for those groups. And so in recreating that as best I could, put out some information, some videos on that. So certainly like us, new studies, when they're coming out, if they are trying to show us something that's a better way to do it, something more responsible, and there's good evidence behind that, then of course I want to try to do that myself. And if I can find a way to where I've done it and I feel like, yeah, I can coach on this, I've done it, I've kind of seen some ins and outs, I can do some troubleshooting and it's working for me, I might want to try to put a video out there showing that method as well. But to not keep your finger on that pulse, that could be where some things could change and we can find out some new things. In responsible science, you got to be willing to update. And that might include like finding out, yep, we did some things wrong. We planted some things where they shouldn't be, or we were rearing a little bit differently than we should. Let's go back and revise. And you just got to be willing to do that, account for mistakes.
Right. And what about you, Annie?
So we bought this property in the spring of 2021. And so that fall had done my garden. I've always been, a nature geek and had planted my milkweed. And so when we got all these monarch caterpillars and I was raising them in like Facebook groups, they came at me with that article. I'm like, you're killing all the monarchs. And then other people would respond and say, well, these are studies that have, kind of debunked some of those things, whatever. So I was very torn because I did not want to do more harm than good, even if my intentions were good. And I tried several things that did not work. I tried getting like mesh bags and putting them around the caterpillars on the milkweed and just moving every day that they needed, to move. That did not work because I did not realize that they needed to leave the milkweed and molt, and also ants and tea fly and stuff can still get in there. So
yeah,
I was trying to, protect them, but keep them wild. In the end, what I settled on, partly because I got an enclosure and had caterpillars in there, and my cats are obsessed and will not leave them alone. And I didn't want their little claws to get in there and kill them. So we have, hooks where you can hang like ferns on the porch and stuff. And so I started hanging them there. And I feel like that's the best of both worlds because they're still getting, the wind, the temperature cycles and the light cycles and all of that stuff, but they are protected from everything and just have to clean it every day and give them fresh food every day. But it was a long learning process for me because of all the scary things people say, and people have such strong beliefs one way or the other. And so, you want to do the right thing. I don't want to make things worse, but it's hard to know sometimes what the right thing is. And I think that people coming in hot like that can really deter people from, experimenting and trying to help. And I feel like especially with the number I raise, because, it's the most I've ever raised in a year, like spring and fall, was like 40. So I feel like even if I made mistakes, that's not detrimental to the population. But I feel like we should
40 would not bring down the population.
Yeah. I feel like we should, encourage people, especially with planting milkweed and planting native. I think that's the number one thing. But if people have the ability to rear and want to do that, I mean, I don't think we should be discouraging people. I think we should be helping people understand the best and healthiest ways to do that.
Right. And I have to agree too, because one might even argue that should most people rear monarchs? Maybe not. It depends if that person is willing to do their homework and do it in a responsible way. And I never want to say no to somebody that wants to get closer to nature. I feel like that's a rare thing these days. So if they want to help, let's help, as long as we can all like learn together. And if we do something wrong, we adjust course and that kind of thing. For me, I think what I got out of that study, and I had the same, thing happen to me that happened to you guys, is that people were like, look, this might, and I do think there is something to the argument of hands off, let nature do its thing. Because most of the time, yeah, you can argue that it does know best. We've interfered. We should leave it alone. And I think, there is something very true about that. But I also think that there isn't a very strong scientific consensus on should we or shouldn't we. And I think when you read things like that article and we want to learn more. There was another study done on that by the University of Guelph, and the basis of that study suggested that yes, monarchs can reorient themselves to migrate if they've given a little bit of time. And there's just a common sense assumption there too. But what I got most out of that study was, oh, should we be rearing outside? That sounds like a great idea. And at the time, I was living in an apartment in the city, and I had a very poor excuse of a backyard. It was like, it's one of those old houses in a college town that was divided into apartments. And we were lucky enough to have some creeping Charlie and ugly turf grass in the back. So, was it easiest for me to raise in my apartment? Yes, but I bought one of those like greenhouse shelves, and I made a setup to where I could rear outside when they were third instar or bigger. And I started thinking rearing more as like sheltering them than raising them. In a lot of those Facebook groups, I've seen a lot of, and this is sweet. Like there's a lot of like, I think a lot of women rear, and they think of these caterpillars as their babies and they want to help them, and and that's great. But like I kind of had to remove myself from the emotion of it and kind of be like, okay, these are your threats outside. What can I give you to have a better chance? And that is a thin layer of mesh, but you're still getting all the, photo period. You're still getting all the natural conditions like the wind and the rain and all that stuff. So I kind of like,
you're the bodyguard.
right. So that's kind of how I started looking at it. And that's kind of like, and we'll talk more about this, but like, I think that is something to think about when you think what is responsible rearing. These aren't your pets. These aren't your babies. You're helping guard a wild animal from that needs to give it a better chance. So that's kind of how my philosophy changed.
I do want to, bringing up that Guelph study, that was, in 2021 when that occurred, that was a pretty cool, further learning of what the 2019 study had taught us. And it was that, these environmental cues, they are important for the migratory impulse to occur, which also it happens in conjunction with the animal going into diapause, to where sexual maturity is not reached. And this is something that the physiology needs to encounter that for this, for the animal to live the 9 months that it's going to need to, and not die within 6 to 8 weeks like the previous generations do. So have those environmental cues. The original 2019 study just got to see that when they were removed, it only took a few days for that to cause confusion, the lack of that day-night cycle and other outdoor exposure environmental cues that we haven't fully identified yet. But then it's also then encouraging to know, like, well, that kind of worked then the other way. And we got to see that in the 2021 study that, all right, so yep, if they didn't have those environmental cues at first, they can still receive them as adults, and they can then still, have a chance at orienting. And I think that was like a really important thing to see, but it didn't change me. It didn't cause me to like want to change back and want to go to less outdoor. Okay, it's not as important now, because when we look at like conjunction of all the other things that are happening with the migration, is that it's starting to be, instead of like okay, let's head down south and we all start to go, it's becoming more and more dispersed and spread apart, where monarchs are sometimes this signal and this impulse later. And it's because of warmer temperature. It's because of a change in the ecology. And with all of those signals, and waiting later in the year when there's going to be less nectar, there's going to be less things to help them along that migratory path, I almost like wouldn't even want to risk, oh, it still needs to take 3 more days now to figure this out and start heading south. Like, it's turning out, the more evidence that we're studying, the more that's coming in, is that every day that the monarch is waiting to do the migration trip is making it more and more of a stress on this migration, which is such a fragile thing.
It is. And at the same time, it reminds me of how strong adaptability is. While you're talking about that, in 2023, when I was rearing, we had, and this is just going to be the way it is, apparently for the rest of our lives here in the Midwest every summer, we had really, really bad air quality from the Canadian wildfires, especially that summer. And I remember it was like late June that year, I think. And I had a few of them come out, eclose, and it was, you could smell campfire in my backyard. it was just hazy. It looked like a fog all the time. The sky was weird. It was really bad. And I had them outside because I was thinking, like, they're still outside. Are they going to figure it out? And I noticed when they came out, they were kind of behaving drunk. Like they were very disoriented and acting strange. So I brought them in and I looked it up and I said, okay, like, how are they affected by this? And it obviously does confuse them a lot because there's smoke particles in the air. They can't orient themselves to find nectar sources or mates or anything like that. And just by how they were acting, I was like, I'm not okay with this. So I brought them in and I had to put them in a walk-in closet because I have cats, and I fed them for like 3 days. It was not ideal. And I think I remember I messaged Annie during this time and I was like, what should I do? Because like I get one argument that like, oh, let them figure it out because they'll do it in the wild anyways. But humans caused climate change. We did this problem. It was only 3 of them, or 3 or 4, I can't remember. And so I gave them a shot, and like once the smoke subsided, I noticed they adapted just fine. They found my flowers in my garden, and I saw them mating not soon long after. So that was a powerful moment for me to show that yes, they can adapt, but I was able to help them in the same way. And they were also mid-season monarchs. They weren't migrators. So like, I kind of felt like they didn't need to necessarily be out super quickly, but I don't know. I thought I'd just bring up that moment because it was kind of a big learning moment for me in observing them and what effects we have on them. So when it comes to people who are staunchly against rearing, do you have any questions for them?
If Well, questions for people who are staunchly against rearing, like honest questions, yeah, like do you have access to my home address? Those kinds of questions. I might want to know a few things. I if someone were staunchly against it, I guess I would ask, are you against every single situation? What is the
Right.
reason? I need to know what your reasoning is, because some people's reasoning as to why they are staunchly against it could be just a blanket hands-off nature. And
Mm-hmm.
if you're going down that avenue, let's again go back to that parking lot crack where one milkweed plant is sprouting up there, and because it's a young, new, fresh sprout, females might have more of a preference for those more tender leaves, less established by predators, and have the impulse to lay an egg on there. And I think it would be kind of foolish to look at that situation and say, well, she's supposed to figure it out. She has to learn to adapt to what a parking lot is. That's not, if anything, that reveals a misunderstanding of how evolutionary biology works. So it's kind of a dead end argument there with it. But if they're staunchly against it because they feel that it promotes the idea of, well, you're taking in all these numbers, and it makes people think that rearing monarchs and raising lots of numbers is the way to help increase their population, and it's really spreading disease and spreading OE parasites and causing more harm than good, then I would say that they have an argument there. They would just need to also give me the chance to explain that is why I am doing the responsible things that I do try to do. That's why I'm, if I am looking at, and each year I am, rearing 20 or more, I've invested the $12 in a handheld microscope so I can do some OE testing to make sure I don't have an outbreak in my system. And I'm doing preventative measures like bleach treating leaves to prevent the 20 eggs I might take in from having an NPV infection that just wipes them out when actually they would have had a better chance in nature than without. But again, I go back to what kind of eggs we're collecting. If I have some very good rationale as to why that egg's not going to make it, I've got no problem taking it in. And I don't know where the staunch argument is going to ever be able to overcome me looking at that adult monarch that comes out OE free and is ready to fly. And if he or she is released and somebody wants to say, well, survival of the fittest, we didn't know that it had the best genes, and it might have some bad genes that it got out there into nature. Well, okay, but what happens with bad genes in nature, to my understanding, is they get weeded out pretty quick. And there's this migration thing coming up. That's a pretty tough trial to, it's quite the triathlon that they need to do. And I think that if you have some bad genes make it through that, then maybe you need to question whether it was a bad gene or not. You got to go back to, why did you identify that as a bad gene? And if it starts to spread throughout the population, that might even be something that is not a bad gene. I'm not trying to get into the genetics of this, but just the concern for you're getting bad genes out there. yeah, if you're breeding some monarchs and you're handpicking what boys and girls are going together, and you're just doing that for multiple generations, and then you release thousands out into your environment, I agree. You are doing something there that can affect the
I'm
genetic
against that too. Yeah.
population. But if you are taking in 20 and you saved them from some ants that are nearby, I don't think that you are messing with evolutionary biology to any degree that you need to be concerned with here. I think you're helping out some individuals, and they are saying thank you. You just have to do it with the mindset of understanding you helped out the individual. You are not helping out the population necessarily.
Right.
It is a conservation effort to really restore habitat. But I would, go back to what Annie is doing as far as we're at, population numbers so low now to where, yeah, helping out to boost some numbers there at the first generation. That is something that maybe is helping out. It does give some push towards a population size that maybe now is large enough to be able to handle a potential fall autumn storm that comes out of nowhere during migration, which we realistically are seeing such things take out, large numbers of monarchs, significant chunks of their population to where we want to have a population size that has maybe a buffer zone to encounter these climate change types of extreme weather events and be able to still survive it.
How about you, Annie?
Well, I would agree, and I especially this spring, as you know, Emily, I've never had health problems. I've made mistakes, but I haven't had OE. But this spring I had a bunch of T-fly, like a lot. And it's things like that that is my argument against. Okay, I shouldn't say that. I think nature is best. Let habitat restoration is the best practice, like 100%. And I understand the hands off, but things like that are not survival of the fittest type things. When there's a baby caterpillar and a parasite attacks it, then so if I can find eggs and raise those monarchs responsibly and contribute that way, I feel like that's not doing any harm. I think, like I said, there's a definite learning curve. There's wrong ways to do things, of course. I hate the people rearing butterflies to release at weddings and things like that.
Yeah.
But when you're doing things for the right reasons and the right way, I just feel like you're not hurting anything. And I feel like encouraging people to plant native, plant milkweed is the best thing we can do. But when it comes to those and some states have laws against it. And I mean, what are you going to do? Your hands are tied. Although I did see someone in a Facebook groups in California talking about how they're raising them anyway and had pictures of them. Like,
people are going to do it anyways.
Yeah.
And that's like also one of my questions, like to people who are staunchly against it. My question is, people are going to do it anyways. Do you not want us to help them do it the right way?
right.
Yes, indeed. Couldn't have said it better. No, like it's
I'm
human
also
nature too. You find a kid finds an egg in the backyard, and if you know how to do it the right way,
Right.
who's going to not take advantage of
Let
that
them
gem
experience that magic.
backyard? Yes.
And I think that a lot of parents do that for their kids. And I really think that that is important to teach your kids about nature and about the importance of, all life. And, pollinators are critical for our survival. And if you don't teach kids, then they're not going to know and they're going to grow up not caring. And we need to set up the next generation the best we can to continue to try to help reverse as best we can the things that we're screwing up.
And in my years of doing this, I've experienced plenty of grown adults who don't know the basics of the butterfly life cycle, like plenty of adults. And for me, I guess I wouldn't have never thought of that because I learned that right away from obviously from my dad, and my grandma really loved nature and butterflies too. So I was lucky to have that, but not all kids do it. But I did learn about it in school. So, and learning about basic life cycles through butterflies is an easy way to show kids how to do that. And I think one of the things I got a lot was people don't understand that they only eat milkweed. They think they eat whatever leaves come in their way. They think, they don't understand that they don't spin a chrysalis. That's right. Moths spin they don't understand and I don't know, the whole cocoon chrysalis thing, I don't really get on people about that, but like they just like I'm trying to remember some of the other ones I've had, but I've often seen a strong misunderstanding of how the life cycle fundamentally works in the stages, and from people who are my age, 50, 60, 70. So it's just, it always blows my mind. So like, I think people like us doing what we do and putting that information out there is important if they're not getting it in the educational system.
And nobody wants to do it the wrong way. Everybody
No.
wants it the right way. So, that's, like you say, like it's human nature. You can look at what humans are going to do, and people can point their finger or shake their finger and say you shouldn't do a certain something. But the question isn't about should or shouldn't. It's are they going to do it? And so if they're going to do it, then with the proper information out there, at least it can be done responsibly. And if someone were to ask me, Richard Lund, you make raising monarchs. You show how to raise them from eggs to adults. What's your argument for why people should do it? I don't know that I have an argument for why you should do it. Why you want to do it? Sure, there's lots of reasons. Why you should do it? I don't know that I have that argument. I do think I have a pretty good argument for why I should want to put out videos that show how to responsibly do it. I think that there's that argument very much. So it's the Raising Monarch series, if anything, it was never meant to be, and it's not trying to be, hey, this is something cool that everybody should be a part of. Check out this YouTube channel. Here's a new trend. Tell your mom, tell your friends. I'm not trying to. I'm just trying to look at it as if you were interested in doing this, here's the responsible ways, here's things to consider, and here's what I'm doing. And if this can help inspire you to do it in a responsible way, then yes, excellent, cool. But it wasn't ever something to like say, I'm trying to get so many of you to do it, because it hasn't.
Right. And for me, like I've had people approach me and be like, do you think I should do this? And my answer has always been like, I don't know. Do you want to? Do you think you should? Like, it's just, it's always, and everybody's like number that they can take in and their setup can always be very different and personal. Like I'm somebody that works 8 to 5, and I luckily work from home. So like I can go check on them at lunch, and I have the time to go on a milkweed run if I run into that situation. But I can't have so many to where it's taking up my life, because if you can take in 50 and responsibly do it, that's fine. But for me, it doesn't look that way. If you are like retired, or you happen to not work, or you have summers off, you have a lot more time to do it so it depends on what you're willing to put into it, and what that can look like for you. And it's all about quality, not quantity. And I think it's important for people to remember, because like obviously you're going to love it, you're going to get emotionally attached, but you have to remember that you're doing this for them, not for you. So that's always something that I talk about when people ask me that question.
Now, you have an interesting question here. What are your favorite arguments against rearing from people who do not support it? I like that question a lot, because it's kind of like, obviously we rear some monarchs, but it's asking us to kind of play devil's advocate. So, what is the best, attack of the argument of rearing? What's the best heard? And I think that, I haven't heard a lot of arguments against it, other than just, what's already been kind of addressed, that some are saying, it's off, let nature take its course. And like all the possible cons that were listed there at the beginning, they do all kind of just fit into two categories. The cons are you could do it irresponsibly and all these problems that you have, or it's just let nature do its thing and don't mess around with nature. And I think that that category ignores we already are messing around with nature. And what can we do to try to reverse some of that, repair some of that? And when it comes to the arguments against it, I would say that the best ones I've heard, if the purpose is to help increase the numbers of the monarch population, if that's why somebody is going about rearing, I'm trying to do it to increase the numbers. Your time and efforts are probably better spent restoring habitat. So I don't think it's right to say cease and desist all of it, but I know that every year I'm gonna feel like raising 10 or 20, maybe 30 if I find that many eggs. It's enjoyable. Pleasure from doing it and knowing I'm helping out those individuals. But I also recognize, like in years where I have done 100 or 200, it got to be to where I was doing it out of scientific curiosity of what would be the limits without ever finding them. How many could I do? But after that, it was also a quick tutorial of there's not a reason to do that. But there's you can just still get the same enjoyment and pleasure from doing it, and maybe have a little bit more time to educate others, spread awareness, plant more milkweed, restore more habitat, if I'm only rearing 10 or 20, and then actually putting my time and effort into conservation. So I think the best argument that I could have as to why somebody maybe shouldn't rear would be if your real goal is you want to do a long-term conservation effort, then it's much more better spent using that time and effort to restore habitat. At the same time, if you want to get others into this, rear a few anyway at first, because just it so catalyzes the understanding of why you want to anyway, getting that connection with the animal.
Right. And I think for me, the answer to that question is I think a lot of people who get into rearing right away do not think about the illnesses and their vulnerabilities.
I
I
didn't either.
didn't know I didn't know what OE was when I was a kid. I didn't, and they don't I think a lot of us I think there's also kind of an expectation. Egg, caterpillar, chrysalis, butterfly, and I think there's an expectation that that's what you get every time when you take one from the wild, because maybe as a kid you never experienced death or any of those things, but you're gonna experience those things when you're rearing. And I think a lot of people, if you aren't going to put in the time to make sure that you set them up for success with a clean habitat, with good ventilation, bleaching if you're especially if you're in the South and that kind of thing, like, then I think that's a good point. Like, NPV is very spreadable and it's very easy to do that. So I think for me, that's one of the biggest arguments against it that I think holds a lot of merit, but obviously with everything, nuance. And if you're willing to put in the work to mitigate that, then I think it's great. So that would kind of crush that argument for me. How about you, Annie? Do you have any thoughts about this question?
Well, the main arguments I see against are in two camps. The people who are saying, citing that study, saying they can't orient, and then, which we've already discussed at length, and then the people who say the only thing you should be doing is restoring habitat. And I mean, I agree with that argument, but I also don't feel like it hurts anything to
Mm-hmm.
also. I do agree that we need more milkweed. We need more, food sources along the migration path in particular. But a mistake I see most often on these groups with new people that are so excited is they've gone out and they've found 20 eggs and they have one little stem of milkweed for them and they don't
Yes.
understand how much they eat. And then they're like, what do I do? What
Mm-hmm.
can I give them instead? And so I know people get so frustrated with that, but we all, everybody who rears monarchs started somewhere. You don't just,
Mm-hmm.
come into this world knowing everything about monarch biology. And so I feel like there's ways to be helpful. Like there's always people in there that say, "Oh, I gave mine cantaloupe and they were fine," things like that. But
Oh gosh.
I just feel like we can help teach those people. And if they still have the caterpillars, it's not too late. Like they haven't sentenced them to death. They still can go find more milkweed, buy more milkweed, But that's just a really common problem I see, that people find these eggs or find caterpillars and they're so excited and they get like a twig of milkweed and feel like they're going to see this whole life cycle and it's going to be amazing, but they're all going to die.
Right. And that's something too that, like, it's very important and that's part of responsible rearing. And we'll talk about this later when we kind of summarize what that means. But obviously don't take in more than you can handle, but it's important not to take all the milkweed from the wild while still having enough to feed your caterpillars too. And it's okay if you get overwhelmed to go in one of those groups and be like, hey, you know what? I don't have time. This is more than I anticipated. Can somebody take these off my hands and help me? And I've seen
And
that happen too.
I think it's important too for like the information to be out there, because if you have people who have taken in, like I've got 8 monarchs on this twig of milkweed in a jar, and what's for those who would say don't rear, what are they expecting? Would they expect
Mm-hmm.
that the other enthusiasts, hobbyists that want to do this, that we should be saying, hey, put that back? No,
Mm-hmm.
that's just something we don't do. Hands off, put that back. There's problems, and we're not going to get into why there's problems. We're not going to get into what they're facing. We're just going to say the monarchs are hurting. Keep out of this. And I think that that's kind of an ivory tower stance of where the knowledge.
Yes.
I don't want to gatekeep any of that knowledge. I don't think that knowledge should be gatekeeped. If there's a reason why there are risks involved with rearing monarchs and spread of disease if it's done irresponsibly, then let's teach that. If there's plight to what the monarch is facing, especially if it's because of human actions, let's teach that. Let's have access to this information and put it in the hands of us so we can have the chance to make these rational, critical thinking choices. But it's also true that, you know, a little bit of information can be a dangerous thing. If we're going to do this, as far as if we're going to understand that people are accessing information on how to do it, then it needs to be thorough. It needs to try to cover these avenues of what the ins and outs are. I just think that there can be some of the opinion, and some of them might have some very good PhDs in this field that are still of this opinion, and I understand it, of just wanting to maybe go to a time period where people weren't interested in this and maybe weren't trying to get their hands on this and get involved. But they know that the monarch has a plight going on. And if there isn't good information out there, I guarantee you with social media's advent, there's going to be bad information out there. So it's kind of Pandora's box has been open. People are going to rear monarchs no matter what a lot of us are saying. And so do you want it to be just, hey, wing it, go for the best? Or do you want some good information?
And thinking in terms of like what is happening in this country currently, like a lot of science and research is being defunded, and a lot of conservation organizations will rely on citizen scientists to participate in these programs and give them information. And um, like one of the easiest community science that I can think of to explain is the tagging program through Monarch Watch, which when you do that, you can either go out to a field and, you know, catch them with a butterfly net and tag them, or you can rear them yourself and tag them during that time of year. With those programs can still continue with our help. So I don't want to discourage anybody from participating in these programs when we can still, okay, research is being defunded. So we might have lost this study at this one lab at this one university somewhere, but we can still make progress with the public's help. And I think it's important not to discourage that with, you know, like you said, coming on them with a blanket, do not interfere attack from the ivory tower. We shouldn't be gatekeeping it. And the more people that are willing to help, the better off of a chance that we have.
And here we go too, is that if, hey, let's take the role of advocating for the funding cuts. I'll equip that role. We're saying the government shouldn't be spending the taxpayers' money on these studies and the citizen or and the scientific research to do this. Well, then, okay, I guess that means that we're putting it in the hands of the citizens and that it should is community-based and community-driven and citizen-driven. All right, if that's what you say, that's what we're going to do. And so
exactly
more out there and taking activism and taking up the helm and organizing on our own. If that's what you want, that's what you're going to get.
Exactly. So in your efforts of sharing what you rear online, have you ever been approached by someone against, obviously we all have, you know, experienced that. We've talked about that. I brought this question up because is there anything that you are doing specifically that people try and call out? And I mention this because every year I have my release videos and I show like the butterfly, how I hold the butterfly, and how you hold a butterfly properly is by the thorax holding the wings closed gently but firmly so they can't flap and harm themselves or damage their wings. But there are always people in my comment section saying that I shouldn't grab the butterfly. I shouldn't touch them. Oh no, the scales are falling off, so they hurt. So I was just curious
what. You were gonna say this. Yeah, I've had the same people say that about my stuff too. And like I had this one person, they were angry. They were like just as you guys had said coming in hot. They were coming in on fuego about this. And they sent me a link to show me here's the proper way. And I was like, man, I remember this link when I got there. Like, yeah, that's how I learned how to hold them. And so, like, they were criticizing was exactly the same procedure to the link that they showed that they were arguing. That's how you're supposed to hold them. Yeah, I've had that experience. Maybe it was the same poster. I don't know.
It's possible. I think, but it happens a lot because I guess when like they're scrolling through their feeds, they see a big, like, because I zoom in so you can see them better. Like you see a big human hand hold this butterfly and they think of the butterfly as so fragile, which I mean, they are, but like they just, I think it's like a lot of shock. But I've actually had the experience where I'm like, look, I've like, because one of the reasons I initially liked doing what I do on TikTok is because you have the option to respond to a question on the screen with a video. So like you can show the question and then answer it. And I thought that interactivity was really cool. And so I was able to say like, this is how, here's Monarch Watch's website. Here's the video on how they tell you to hold them when tagging them. Well, I'm going to do that every time. I've had people assume, or like they Google something and then they end up on a Reddit where somebody's claiming that if scales come off, that they can't fly because they can't take in the sun anymore. And that's also a bad argument because the scales are just going to kind of fall off during their life. And the wings don't
In
have
some
pain
cases,
receptors,
yeah, like we learn some of these factoids at a certain level of education, and they're cool factoids. They're cool to know. Like, yep, the scales does help the monarch take in energy and warm up.
It does, yeah.
Yep, thermal regulation is part of it. But I think somewhere I know in the 80s I heard don't touch the scales of the butterfly's wing or it can't fly. And so like
Yep.
you don't touch it. Like your hands were always off because you knew if you touched your pinky finger to just the tip of that wing, that butterfly was dead. And they drilled that into our heads, and we kind of get stuck in that mentality where we get these factoids when we're young kids and stuff, or even going through middle school or even sometimes high school, and they're just stuck there, and we don't realize, well, there's actually some more nuances, a lot more details to know about.
Mm-hmm.
And I try to sometimes bring in the classroom is like, you first learn about time in kindergarten, when we're teaching you about when the big hand's here and the little hand's there, this is when we're going to have nap time, and you get the graham cracker. Teaching that, we don't teach you time zones because that would blow your mind in kindergarten at 5 years old. We don't let like, what, it's 3 p.m. here, but it's some other p.m. somewhere else. And we definitely are not bringing in general relativity and the stretching of space-time at that age. So when it comes to like stuff people have heard about, the monarch butterfly, it's coming in from all these different, possible education learning levels. And we live in a day and age where like we are so quick to know we are right that people
Oh
will
my
get
gosh, yeah.
behind that little factoid from third grade and they want to like argue why they know something. And it's always to try to just take it from the standpoint of, yeah, I used to be like that maybe at some point. There's probably some subject that I thought I knew more of than I did.
Mm-hmm.
We all have some. But when I encounter somebody who's like that, the thing I can't help but notice is, hey man, you're passionate about the monarch butterfly. We should talk. We have
Right.
some common ground that we can work with here. Definitely.
Right.
It's so funny because I remember learning that in elementary school because we would try to catch butterflies like at recess. It was like the teacher's way of getting us to leave the butterflies alone. And it is the one misconception with little kids because all little kids think that, all parents, I feel like, have said, leave that butterfly alone. If you touch its wings, it's going to die. And I don't because it is, I teach, I've taught kindergarten and first grade, and that is way too complicated. And when I release butterflies with them, I don't touch them because I don't want them to be like, oh, I can try that, with their little fingers that aren't developed and fine motor skills and like just squish butterflies. But I'll like turn the habitat on its side and unzip it so it can, because they just fly up. So they just fly away. But that is interesting that there's so many adults that think that. And that is one thing that I don't tell them because I don't want them to go out trying to catch butterflies.
It's like the don't touch the baby bunny or the mother won't come back
Right.
because they can yeah.
And I think like certainly like there's the age appropriate level to learn certain things. And yeah, now you're ready to get the real information.
Right. And that's an important thing to talk about is like different levels in which we can learn things for sure. No.
That is when you hear them make that misconception because it's one of those things that you grow up with and it doesn't ever occur to you, I should tell all the adults around me that this thing they learned isn't true because you don't think about it until someone
We're
says
not having a meeting on this. Yeah, like we're not having like now that you're in high school, this is all the stuff we told told you in elementary school that we stretch the truth on. Like, we don't have those like annual meetings to do that. Like,
Hey guys,
it's
I've
just not.
invited you all to dinner tonight, and now here, I hope you brought your list of 20 things that we believe in are probably wrong. Like, let's do a show.
Exactly. We don't
Tell you
have
what,
that structure.
teachers lied to you.
Right. What do they call those? Half truths?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's funny. So obviously this hobby has become pretty popular, and like I was thinking about this when I was writing up these questions. Do you think that this boom in popularity happened more during COVID?
I would say there's something to that because we considered buying property during COVID. I feel like, and there was no property, like everywhere you went, you had to pay way over asking price for any kind of property. It was like everyone was like, let's get away from people and wanted to move out. And then I think that once you move out onto property from the suburbs, it's one of the natural things. You want to grow food, you want horses, you want to raise butterflies, like you want to garden, I feel like it's kind of a natural step. So I think it'd be interesting for someone to, study that phenomenon and or why it happened, but I wouldn't be surprised if there's something to it.
And I think that
Yeah.
it's I wouldn't just think that we had an upsurge in COVID. I got evidence of it from just comment sections, videos, just talking about how COVID got them the time to be able to look into their interests. And I know that during COVID, for me, I skated a lot more than I had pre-COVID. During the shutdown, it was something that you could do skateboarding. I'm talking about something you could do outdoors. Social distancing is already incorporated into that sport for the most part. And people had some time, not everybody, but a good portion of the US had some time on their hands to explore their interests, to take the time to fix that water heater, or to finally, let's find out about some ecology in our backyards. And in some cases too, some people had the time to be bored, and we don't always get a lot of time bored in today's society. And as much as we hate boredom, boredom is also the birthplace of creativity. And when you are
Yes.
bored, it's a healthy situation to actually be in, because that's when you start to expand upon your own thoughts and devise your own thinking as to what do I want to spend my time with? What could I be doing instead? What are some things I've always been interested in? Now I have the time to do it. And I think that certainly some people then took to their backyards to find out more about gardening, to find out more about ecology. I mean, it was something you could do outside at home. You're stuck at home. And that's when some people got to actually had the time in their life to hear about some of the things that we've been hollering about in the background for a long time. A lot of the other noise of life turned down, and people could take more interest into what are these different issues that are around me, be it about the natural world and environmentalism, or be it about just what's going on around me. And we could all take better interest in that and see that a lot more carefully.
Right. I personally, that's kind of when I started to go a little quote unquote harder with my my attempt to share it all on social media. I tried YouTube. I couldn't do it. I don't know how you have the patience to do it, Rich. But I was partially laid off because I was in the hospitality industry. And while I had reared monarchs beforehand, I really had the opportunity to delve in, and I could go hunting for eggs every day. I could film every day. I could, do all these things every day. And it was an opportunity, like it was such a good time for people to get outside and get with nature. There was obviously like to every pro, there's every con. So I like that part of it. But like I noticed all the monarch Reddits and Facebook groups that were in exploded to a point of out of control. Like the mods couldn't keep up. There was a lot of people talking about what you should and shouldn't do. There was fighting. And I was just like, what happened to my happy nature hobby space with these online communities? Why is everybody so mad? So there's obviously like a downside to it, but that's kind of why I brought that question up, because like it was very noticeable in a shift in terms of like how many people were doing it. And with that,
I think end result too, like, you walk out of, I'm not, COVID-19 is still around. It's like, I don't know when you actually have a finish line ever for a pandemic, but definitely things are way better now than they were a few years
right,
ago.
because we have the vaccine now, and we're
And
not being
coming
told
out
to
of that,
isolate.
you now then have, that garnered plenty to find an interest that they have. And for some, maybe it was just, year or two interest and then back to work.
Mhm.
For others, you get to find, without knowing we were trying to find it, here's some people that are now in part of this community too, who are willing to roll up the sleeves. And so there's
Right.
definitely some gains from that, I think.
Oh, absolutely. And I think I would rather have more people involved than not. But with the downside of that, I started witnessing a lot of misinformation. And so I was curious as to if you both had heard any monarch misinformation or butterfly misinformation, really. Like, what is the most common thing you've heard? Have you corrected it? I'm just curious to what is out there from your perspective that you've perhaps witnessed.
I've seen a lot like we've been talking about, and I do sometimes correct it. But I don't have the kind of platform that you guys have where I have really any authority. So it's just kind of in comment sections when people ask questions or say something, then I'll kind of gently correct them. If they jump down my throat and tell me how wrong I am, then I won't I won't
Yeah.
engage. I let the people, there's in all those groups, there's experts that know a lot more than me, and I'm like, they can do it. They can do the heavy lifting because I don't know enough to always say things. But yeah, there's always misinformation.
I'm
Um,
gonna say this. I'm not an authority on this, and you know, I appreciate
Well, I feel
you
like
are as
you're more
much of an
authoritative.
authority.
No, you've been doing it longer. You know more. Most of what I know, I learned from you.
Well,
well, I think
you were too kind.
I am not an authority as far as anything beyond my own experience. Now, I can say I'm an authority on what happened to me. I'm the only person that
Right,
you can
right.
verify what were things like for me. And I think that when it comes to science, it's important to understand, there are no like real authorities as much as you can have experts. And experts,
Hmm.
they are experts for reasons. Like they know a whole lot more of the details and the inner nuances of them. It's important to listen to what they have to say very much. But even they can have, something be wrong. Doesn't mean that they're often wrong, but yeah, sometimes we get some things wrong. It's part of the process. The authority in science is the evidence. And you can, for example, just a much less heated debating topic is cold stratification of milkweed seeds. There aren't as many
Yes.
people up in arms about this one. And I had been hearing for a long time, many times in comment sections about milkweed, this thing that I didn't know about prior, that they're supposed to be cold stratified. And people would use that word need. They need to be cold stratified. And people would come to me with questions. I heard that they need to be cold stratified. And I knew from my experience, like, I wasn't really keeping track of if seeds were frozen and I found them in the spring or if I just kept these from the fall. So let's do an experiment. And I did. And, my experience had already showed me what my experiment then confirmed too, was that you didn't need to have them frozen. And it made sense as well. I know common milkweed, the species I was using, it grows in some states that are south enough to where it's never going to be frozen and it grew fine there. So the idea of like misinformation, oh gosh, it's out there, it's all over the place. But how
Hmm.
severe of misinformation is it? That can be, it's a lot of it is hearsay. And we've put up with it for a long time. It's just we didn't have ways of quickly verifying that, yep, that was wrong. We back in the
Right.
80s when I was growing up, my parents were talking to other parents about gardening stuff and they heard all sorts of information. It's just we didn't know if it was right or wrong. Just a lot of stuff we heard didn't work
Hmm.
for us. And it turns out maybe it was wrong. And we, now we have an internet where we can fact check a lot of this stuff a lot more efficiently. But the misinformation, it's still out there, and it's important to like this isn't disinformation where there's the intention of making you wrong, but just misinformation, stuff that we got wrong because it's a mistake or it's something we heard that we think is right that we're just passing on. And like even an
Right.
example, and this here's just kind of like I guess fitting because it wraps into other nuances from our conversation. But I had to, in preparation for this, I saw like the glyph or the Gelf study was brought up. So I'm like, oh yeah, Gelf study. It had been a while, so I read through that one. Let me just kind of quick look and did a quick Google search. Found from the University of Gelf. So this is their own website. They've got an article, Monarchs Raised in Captivity Can Orientate Themselves for Migration, U of G Study Reveals. Okay, hooray, this is awesome. This was posted on June 8th of 2021. This is one of the articles celebrating the new study. Paragraph 4, I read verbatim. And I'm not trying to beat up this, University of Guelph. They do great work,
No,
but
I
just
get it.
show how easy it is for misinformation to be out there. Recent US studies have suggested that captive raised monarchs become disorientated when they emerge from their chrysalis and cannot fly south. Now that sentence just right there already has some of the misinformation that some of this
Right.
2019 are passing out, that captive raised monarchs become disoriented. Doesn't make any differentiation between indoor versus outdoor, just kind of states that. And when you have these kinds of sentences out there in all these different news articles where people are trying to do the right thing, they're not trying to confuse anybody. They would love for their articles to be very informative. It's just they don't know about the details. You have so much misinformation out there to where you could go and combat it in comment sections or on Reddit and on message boards and all that kind of stuff. And it could be taxing. And what I've found too is that very few times from any experience I've had, has somebody gone to a comment section and came out of that comment section with a totally different idea. Very few times is somebody like, man, I had this really strong opinion, but then I read that one comment from, Cliffhanger 297, and now I'm really thinking about things differently. Like that has rarely ever happened. So instead, when I see like, hey, there's enough misinformation out here where this might need to be something to address, try to kind of make a video to address it and get that out.
Right. And I think like to a lot of people, like they try to find an answer to a question and they don't do their due diligence. And it's not necessarily their fault if they're trying to solve a question. Like one of the ones I thought of right away was the whole butternut squash and cucumber being an alternative to milkweed. So like somebody is running out of milkweed, they're panicking, they go on the internet, can they eat anything else? And they probably brought up an article by somebody who, I think there was like there used to be this butterfly farm in Florida that they had a bunch of different articles on. I think it was like butterfly fun facts. And on there they talk about how like butternut squash is like a last resort alternative to milkweed and only when they're fifth instar before they're about to pupate. Not any other stage and preferably not, but this is something that they discovered would work. I personally never recommend it. I've witnessed people like Google that quick and they're like, oh, I'll just go get this because I'm out of milkweed. And then they're like, well, I don't have any butternut squashes at the grocery store. Maybe I'll get a cucumber or this kind of squash. And then the caterpillars don't eat it and die. Like that's a very quick way for misinformation to spread as well, because they're trying to solve a problem and they're trying to do it quickly instead of looking into who's saying what else does it say? Is there anything past this title or past the Google AI about the question that I'm asking? So that's just something for if you are curious about raising or if you're rearing, just to be careful of.
I think if it comes to like the most common misinformation that I'm encountering, put it maybe like the last 5 years, would be just really the lumping together of captive bred and wild source reared, or the lumping together of indoors versus outdoors. In a lot of these,
Right.
It was just being called captive reared or captive raised. And I guess it would be important, I think, if someone's going to get into this a bit more, when they are going through those articles, when they are reading about this, to at least recognize, hey, there are differences between those. And so if I'm reading something that's just talking about captive reared monarchs, that they can then have that question in their head of, well, what did they mean by that? And investigate further to learn more, rather than just walking away thinking they've already been warned and they've got that whole picture. Because I think that once you're exposed to the knowledge that there are these differences, then you can kind of look at these with a little bit more of a discerning eye about it.
Right. So with that, I think we all know that there's a lot of arguments too about tropical milkweed and should we use it? Should we plant it? Do you use it and do you feed it to your caterpillars?
I'm going to jump in here because I'm probably completely wrong, and then Rich can correct me. But this is what
I mean, that's a lot of pressure.
I know. I mean, I've heard a lot of arguments against tropical milkweed, and I know in Florida it never dies back. It's year round, so they have problems with contamination and OE and things like that. And my mine dies back, but in Texas. And I've heard a lot of people say if you don't cut it back, then the butterflies will forget that they're supposed to migrate and they'll lay eggs on it, and you ruin everything. In my experience, when I do cut it back in the fall before the migration, it just immediately, like the next day, it's 3 inches tall again. It just keeps coming back. But also, the time that the butterflies migrate back through, our native milkweed, our green and antelope horn milkweed is still there. Like it has not, it doesn't die back until like November or December. It doesn't die back for a long time. So I feel like if that's the problem, that doesn't make any sense to me because there's milkweed.
Right.
Anyway, it's not just the tropical that's still there. My swamp and common tend to die back first, like whenever the days start to get significantly shorter. But the green and the antelope horn stick around for a really long time, and so that's kind of my take. I don't plant it. I don't have it. The only time I get it, because that's usually all you can find at nurseries. I have one nursery that reliably does not spray. So if I have like an egg bombing situation where I have caterpillars and it's spring and there's not enough milkweed yet, then I'll go buy it and I usually will just leave it in the pot and feed it. I used to plant it before I learned about it. I don't plant it anymore, but that's kind of where I am misunderstanding the whole debate is that I don't understand why tropical is bad when the green is still there, you know?
And that's a really good point. And there's a lot of nuance there, like I just had that same situation. Like I have like maybe 7 stems in the little, maybe more than that, of milkweed in the little pocket prairie I planted in my backyard. And I had a female the other day. I think I told you both this separately, but for 30 minutes, she came in and out of that garden and I got completely egg bombed. And she clearly flew away to try to find more milkweed somewhere else, couldn't find it, came back and laid more. And so I'm in a situation where it's like, yeah, there's eggs here that this milkweed is not supposed to sustain, because I think the rule is technically you're supposed to have 29 plants per one adult migratory monarch. And that is not the ratio I have in my garden. So obviously I need to plant more milkweed, but I'm going to have to go get milkweed from somewhere else to feed them. So I would never fault somebody for going to their big box store I think that's more of a big box store problem than anything, that like big box stores should be providing native species. They just provide tropical because it's pretty and it grows fast, which is like, I get that that's fine. They're mainly in business for aesthetics. But like, I'm never going to fault somebody for going to go feed with tropical if they are out of that and they're in an egg bombing situation. It happens, and it just goes to show they don't have enough habitat. Sorry, what were you going to say, Rich?
That was my attempt at humor. You had mentioned that the rule was 29 plants for a caterpillar or something close to that, and I said, "There's rules."
Rule of thumb, I think, is probably the term I should have said. I believe that statistic, I believe, is like an estimation from Monarch Joint Venture, but give or take.
So for tropical milkweed, like the question of like the easy one to answer first is, do if I use it myself, and the answer is no. And that's where whatever opinion I have on it is important to understand that I'm from Michigan and I don't even know if I've physically come into contact with this plant ever before. I don't know if my fingers have touched it. So like, that's where my opinion is deriving. But at the same time, this is probably the topic that I have been asked the most about. And I'm saying even since like 2016, 2017, people were asking.
Really?
Milkweed. And I did not feel like this was something that I was equipped to make any episode or have an opinion about, being from Michigan, having never seen the plant. So, but we're at a point now where I think that there's been enough change in supply of tropical milkweed to where it's been purchased. It's in a lot of places. It already was in a lot of places in the U.S., but it seems that it's also increasing in its amount. I actually have been doing what many have wanted, and I've got an episode that's planned for this season that's going to try to address the topic as best I can. And it's from also like the standpoint too that I've always tried to maintain in any videos I've made, where I'm not telling you what to do. I'm not saying this is what you must do. If you don't do this, you are a bad person. If you do this, you are being still a good person. I don't divide those kinds of lines. Best I can do is say, here's what information I understand and why I make the choices that I do. But with tropical milkweed, if I was going to have the conversation of, is it something that you can have, should have, use in your yard? I know that some people are against it being present whatsoever. I think that you have to understand the reality of the situation, that milk is a tropical milkweed is. And whether, depending upon your locality, whether it's just an introduced species or if it's an invasive species, that can be different depending upon your region. You've got different concerns there. But whatever conversation needs to be had about it, the first part I think I'd want to establish with somebody is, and this might just seem like a silly question at first, but like, what area, what location on the globe are you talking?
Mm-hmm.
Because as soon as then we are saying, if they say anywhere in the US, then okay, it's not native to that region. It's not native in the US. It's not a native species. It's at best introduced there and has maybe been established there. So that then frames the conversation in the right light first of it's not a native species. It doesn't belong there in the first place. So let's proceed with our conversation from there. So that way it's not anybody trying to make an argument. I don't know anybody's going to take their herald and make the argument, well, I should be able to, introduce this non-native species further into my ecology. Because some might say, well, it's already out there. And I would agree in many locations, it is already out there. But why make the choice to purchase more non-native when you could instead make choice to purchase native species? And if the case is because I have some feeding, starving caterpillars at home, and that's the only kind Home Depot has right now, like I understand that. I too would choose
completely
some tropical milkweed leaves and some healthy monarchs over going the cantaloupe route, which I would also choose over the let them starve and die route. So I understand all of that logic.
Right.
Sometimes must deviate from best practices, go into let's make sure this one makes it. But how much tropical milkweed has been used to solve a problem that maybe it too could start to cause a problem with, I think we are starting to see some evidence of that. Now, to then go from we are starting to see some evidence of that to everybody must buy some flamethrowers and get this out of their yard, I don't think that that's going to be a reasonable expectation to be able to do. So if the best science is saying we need to pump the brakes or maybe even stop with tropical milkweed, well, all right, but let's look at that. Let's get that education out there. And let's also then not just cut people loose who bought a house, who have tropical milkweed already growing there, and saying, get that out of your yard and let us know, get back to us when you have. Like maybe we should, have some compassion, some sympathy, and try to find out more about this on our own. Like who else is in the same boat where they have tropical milkweed in their yard, they don't want it there anymore. What's the best way that they can get rid of it without harming the rest of their ecosystem that they've tried to work hard and build within their yard? And that is the problem we actually want to solve, not, yep, get rid of it. like let's try to always be moving towards making a better ecosystem in our area for it. The other part to look at with, I think, tropical milkweed too, is to just recognize if you are purchasing it, if you do have that in your location where it's not native, what's happening with the seeds? Because if those seeds are now, if you just have a potted milkweed, tropical milkweed plant used to feed some caterpillars, no harm, no foul. But if now those seeds are going to be spreading in an area where it's not native and not already established, you might be adding to a problem where we are seeing the tree lines are changing. Well, we're seeing where where tropical milkweed has been established now in the US and where it is also now spreading and in some cases outcompeting the natural native milkweed that is there. And that's where we have a problem where, in those areas, it's an invasive species. And, I love me some milkweed, but still it is an invasive species and it's changing and taking over ecosystems. That's really important to keep a firm eye on. So trying to not have those seeds spread out and get loose, if it's not belong there, maybe flipping the seed pods and keeping your own, tropical milkweed from causing an increase in that number. That might be something more responsible to do. But again, something to really delve more into and look at with an episode coming up.
Any other thoughts, Annie? I saw you turn your microphone on.
No, that's just, it's to me the bigger issue with, well, not having native availability in nurseries is a problem, but I feel like an even bigger problem is when they spray or they don't know if it's been sprayed. So even if they had native milkweed, I wouldn't buy it unless I knew for a fact that nothing had been sprayed on it. But that's a different conversation.
Absolutely. And I think I'm trying to remember what you said earlier, Rich, but there is kind of I don't think this is necessarily the case with tropical milkweed specifically, but the reason we have invasives is because they were brought over because they were either used for medicinal or food purposes or because they're pretty. And I am not the kind of native gardener that tells people you should not have any non-natives. Like, I don't think that's the solution. Like, Donna and I talked about this in some old episodes, but there's like a recommended threshold of like 70% native, 30 non-native. And of course, there's always like different like categories that you can divide the non-natives into. There's like there's naturalized, like dandelions aren't necessarily considered an invasive widely across the US, but they're considered naturalized because they're here and they are in our ecosystem now.
Yes. So like introduced rather than invasive, and that would be what it is too. Like
right.
Chinese
And some of it is
beautiful insect, and
Chinese.
It eats both good and bad, beneficial and pest insects. So like it's worked its way in, but it hasn't outgrown anything. It's just introduced.
Right. And like I personally like really love my peonies, but they're not from here, but they're not harming anything. Like I'm never going to get on somebody's case for that. And I think a lot of people do like the way tropical milkweed looks. And when it comes to any garden center, people are mostly going to garden for looks. It's kind of just the part of the reality we have here. I have run into people where I'm trying to remember what the exact phrasing was, but basically it's a situation where somebody will be like, oh, hey, just so you know, that plant is considered invasive. And they'll be like, well, I like it anyway, so I'm going to do it. I do think there can be a general attitude of like, well, I like it, so I'm going to do it anyways. I don't know if that's the case with tropical, but I think the approach, I'm probably being repetitious here, broken record, but it's all in how you phrase it and talk to people about it. And I would rather the garden centers have a better availability than, tell people, no, you can't have that. Have I made some snarky meme videos about tropical milkweed? Yeah, but that's kind of also entertaining and we can talk about it later kind of thing. So like, yeah, I would never tell anyone, no, you shouldn't do this. Like you mentioned before, I would tell somebody in the South, like, okay, you have tropical milkweed. Are you cutting it back? Are you raising monarchs and are you bleaching? I might suggest somebody who is not willing to do the work of cutting back their milkweed and bleaching in the South, maybe they shouldn't rear monarchs. Like that is the time I think I might discourage it. But has there ever been a time for either of you where you have said to somebody, oh, maybe this isn't a good idea for you? I'm just curious.
No, but I think that's kind of funny. But my platform I'm on is not butterfly centric like you guys. So people don't really come to me with advice so much, but I can't imagine me telling someone you shouldn't do this rather than teaching them the proper way to do it as best I could. And then letting them decide if it's worth the work. But like we wanted to do beekeeping when we moved out here, and we thought that would be so freaking cool. But then when I found out the work that goes into it, I'm like, yeah, no, that's not.
Yep.
And so some people might find out the work that goes into rearing monarchs, which is not nearly as much as beekeeping, but might decide on their own that it's not worth it for them. And that's fine. But I don't see myself ever being like, you should find another hobby.
Right.
For me, like never anybody online. I think anybody who's approached me online, they're asking me probably because I have made videos on here's how to do it, and so like hey, here's already something coming to me, and the people who I have encountered online, they're all at different stages of learning. We're all at that stage too. If they're asking me, that's probably because I was at that stage of learning, and if not, if they're asking me a question. And it's something I don't know that encourages me to want to go learn that part too. So I don't know that I've ever, met someone digitally online who I would say, don't do this. But also I don't know if they're telling me every little detail about how they're about to do it.
Right. What they're doing.
If I saw the reality, maybe it could be. But like in person, just from students, from coworkers at other jobs I've worked, from colleagues at teaching. Some people have shown interest in this to where they want to get their hands into it. And I think that it's never been to where I'd say don't, but I've always kind of tried to ask the proper questions of, how much time do you have? What's your backup plan? If you have to go on a vacation or unexpected this or that, you have a place where there's some milkweed, you can just put the caterpillars there. Like try to just troubleshoot for them. What are the things that I learned, first 5 years and now the first 10 years that I've done it that might be able to cause them to just at least reconsider, do I want to do this or not? Do I have, the at least 28 to 35 days is going to take. And do I have a plan? Do I have some backups? And as long as I do, then it's in good hands. But I think often it's trying to recognize if you think you can rear 10, then try 3 first. Like
Right.
shot, always be conservative in it. And then I don't see why there isn't a reason why somebody couldn't. So I don't know that I would really have somebody to say no. I'm trying to picture though, like who is that person, hypothetical person in my head that I would have to be like, no, oh my God, don't do this. And it's tough to really come up with.
I guess if
Right.
someone
And
told
that
you they
is-
want to start a butterfly farm, like to raise butterflies to sell the wedding, I think then
Yes.
it's like, no, don't do that.
Yes, that would be.
Mhm.
I think that
Absolutely.
I had some requests years back about like, could I make a video on how to hand pair boy and girl monarchs together to get them to mate? What if we have a really like low number season? Maybe we need to do that. And that was where I would definitely draw a line of, no, I'm not a monarch breeder, and that's not anything I'm going to put information out there on how to do. You should not be, I wouldn't be wanting to have my choice be which boys and girls are getting together. That is something for nature to decide. And so there
Right.
are times where it's like, if you're looking to do that too, if I were to make hey, here's how to hand pair, then that's the video that the monarch breeders and those who are just looking to exploit the monarch butterfly for profit, they're going to be using that video more often than actual enthusiasts or hobbyists.
Right.
I can't think of any ethical reason
So-
why enthusiasts or hobbyists doing what we do would need to.
And that's a good way to put it. It's never like, we're not yes or no people where, we always try to ask questions. It's always based on somebody's individual ability or desire. I think I'm trying to remember. I think I had one person ask me about, and I wish I had the example, and I obviously would never name names, but I think there was one, and that's why I asked this question too, because I did have one situation where somebody approached me and they had a bunch of tropical in Florida, and I suggested, oh, you might want to consider finding some native species. Here's some in your area. And then they didn't do that. And then, their butterflies were getting sick. And I'm like, do you know about OE testing? Here's how you can do it. I think I even sent your videos, Rich. And they were like, I don't want to do that. And then I was like, well, there's nothing. It was also like, there's nothing that I can help you with anymore. Like, you're going to do this. I would suggest maybe not because they are very susceptible to this in your area and you're not going to do anything about it or even consider it. So, I said, I can't help you. But I gave you the information you needed, and whatever happened after that happened. So that was the only time.
Rear monarchs responsibly. I cannot help you change reality.
Exactly. And with that, can you guys summarize what responsible rearing means to you? Like, what are the basics that you might, and I know there's always going to be an expansion of anything, but like, is there like a list that you could provide people that are kind of like checkpoints in their rearing journey that they could use as guidelines?
I would say to take online forums advice with a grain of salt, and really research yourself. Because there's a lot of, as Rich has pointed out several times, misinformation. It's not disinformation. There's not like nefarious people in the butterfly community, but everybody for the most part means well, but there's some wrong information that people really, really loudly project. And
Correct.
other than, the basic, cleanliness and knowing how much milkweed you need, and, those are the basics. But I would also, I feel like that's something that tripped me up a lot at the beginning, was comment sections where people very, very loudly said things, and I had no reason not to believe them because I didn't know anything at the time. But now looking back, would very loudly say wrong things.
And they seem very certain, and I think people take that seriously. And I see a lot is like, somebody will show a picture of something that they consider to be happening wrong, and they ask the group what is happening. And you'll get a barrage of answers that somebody's like, I think there was one I saw recently, like they had a lot of people when they first experience molting do not understand that when the caterpillar goes off the leaf, it's okay. And they can be there on like the wall of the enclosure for a long time. So like they'll try to like poke it and see if it's okay, and like it reacts a certain way, and somebody will be like, well, this is too long, this is, they'll give like, and in those situations I try to suggest like you should follow the conservation organizations with the scientists first. Like if somebody's telling you something, can you go to Monarch Watch, Xerces Society, or pollinator.org, or Monarch Watch, and can you find information on that on those sites? And what do they say?
I think like and when we look at the idea of telling somebody you need to do your research, do your own research on these issues, some might be, sorry if anyone's listening to this and kind of out me on this, but some might be out there thinking that reading forums and Reddit and message boards is doing research and don't understand that.
Right.
No, you're reading some things people posted, yo. You wanna go to an authoritative source like something that's a .org, university, .edu kind of stuff. You want to check out, monarchwatch.org, Journey, or Xerces Society to get some higher quality, higher shelf information. And really, to the best of my knowledge, all three of those sources I just mentioned do have here is protocols on if you are wanting to rear, and some come with more cautionary warning than others, but still as knowledge as of today, all three of those still have sources on how to do it. And I did, in the years doing the videos and looking at the sources too, like I knew that from some of that information, like there's some details missing in the procedures they're given. There's some other stuff that's, the hobbyist or enthusiast will encounter that your 10 steps don't really cover, and that's where some of the video stuff I've tried to flesh out some of those answers too. And this isn't like a plug for the channel, go watch those videos, but I would say if you're getting into it, then it is important to consult many different sources. But authoritative sources, check out and see what all of these websites have to say. Check out what any of the universities are saying about monarch research and what their guides are for this. Check out what videos you can, be it of mine or others. And once you have some of this information under your belt, you too are going to be able to kind of sniff out, is this something where people have put in the time to learn what they're talking about? Or is this, hey, somebody's into monarchs this year and already has a YouTube channel or a TikTok, and they're just trying to get a few, videos out there, and they found some really cool factoid that cantaloupe can be used as well, and they're trying to put that out. There could be flash of the pan. I'm just trying to get views and get some videos out there because I think monarchs are cool this year. Stuff that you're also having to sift through. So trying to find too, you read a lot of them and read early on, but you're going to find some good sources that are out there that might be more trusted go-tos. And once you've got that, you're more equipped. But if we're looking for like a list of responsibility stuff, I don't know if I got like a huge list, but I know just some quick tips that I would give. Be conservative, as mentioned, in what you try to bring in. And if you think you can do 10, try 3 or 4. Take into consideration all the things you didn't think about yet, like how are you cleaning up the poo-poo? Like clean up the frass. You're gonna have maybe more than one container, so that way, hey, you've already got a sanitary cleaned out one ready to go. You can just transfer, them in and out. Have you thought first about, is your setup going to be indoors or outdoors? And if you're doing it here in the later season, more outdoor exposure is better. So try to think about those logistics first. If you are ever looking to do it a year where you're going to get into 20 or more, hey, if you're willing to be that committed to do 20 or more, then you should be committed to purchasing a $12 handheld microscope online and do some OE testing. That way it's being responsible to make sure you don't have an outbreak occurring and something that you don't want to have happen anyway, detrimental to just your process, and it's very defeating and a bummer.
It is. Oh yeah.
20 or more, take some steps to learn about bleach treating of eggs and leaves, because that can prevent a lot of infections beyond just the OE parasite. And I think in like the NPV bleach treatment video I made, I showed also how I learned how to do it, and it was from my own failure. It was from my own outbreak. We all go through these trials and tribulations, so let's try to learn from those things. So, my advice: keep it conservative and try to learn as much as you can. The information's out there, just go after it.
And something I personally learned that I would kind of give people to think about if they're getting into this is like the appropriate enclosure for the right life stage. Because as Annie mentioned earlier, I grew up thinking you could just put a stick in a jar. Well, we've learned since then that for at least the butterfly stage, it is a good idea to use something, preferably mesh. So when the butterfly it closes and it starts to fly around and move, a hard plastic or hard glass surface could damage their wings. And they can't climb back up those surfaces like a caterpillar can. So it's just things to think about. I personally start mine off in sometimes like Tupperware containers while they're eggs so I can keep a better eye on them when they're hatching. I will eventually then move them into a critter keeper. And I will note that I start mine off indoors because my area in particular, we get a lot of like trichogramma and chocolate wasps that are pretty much microscopic wasps that will infect eggs, parasite eggs and small caterpillars. So could they not get through the mesh? Possibly, but I also keep my mesh outdoors, and so there's some wear and tear where they get holes. So once they are big enough, I will move them outdoors to start experiencing those light and dark conditions. But I go through a different kinds of enclosures, and that might look different for you. Maybe you can use the mesh container the whole time. It's just things to think about when you're rearing that could, affect them or not. I think it's really important with cleanliness. Make it easy on yourself and get one that is well ventilated, because it is very easy if like you're keeping milkweed wet with like paper towel, or you have paper towel lining the bottom so it's easier to clean up the frass. Mold can grow, and that will affect the butterfly. So it's all about what's your setup, how much are you going to clean it, where is it? So those are just things to think about when it comes to like what methods you use.
For those outdoor containers that I sometimes show in my videos, I don't know which brand, I don't even remember, but I know a lot of us are using those sometimes for outdoor containers. A quick tip I found is that when I'm going to clean those, I have just, figured because of mold and other growth reasons, I give them a outdoor spray down first with the hose, so that way the mesh is wet. And then with the same bleach solution concentration that I use, show what I make in those different videos, the same solution I use for bleach treating eggs and leaves. In a spray bottle, I'll spray down that mesh, give it, at least 2 minutes of exposure. I don't want to let the bleach just sit on there because that will eventually eat away at the mesh material and just weaken it over time, which even this method will still eventually. Giving it at least like a minute or two of exposure just to sanitize it that way, and then spraying it again with the hose. I found that that's a lot easier on these outdoor summer months than, having to go through the full process of like in the washing machine, which they are safe.
Yes.
Most products are, but like this has been a lot more easier and convenient, and it's still quite sanitary. So there's my tip.
And something I've learned is that a lot of those pop-up enclosures, and they have so many now, there's so many different kinds. I have ones that are like held together with these like plastic pipes, so they're very upright. And a lot of these come with viewing windows. I've used that as the floor in the past, but on these taller ones, I have also found that they take sunlight and kind of create like a prism effect, which really warms up the enclosure. And I've noticed some like discoloration on my chrysalides. And so like I attributed it to the light coming in through those areas. So what I did, because I don't have really any trees in my backyard, I keep them out on the deck, is I purchased a shade cloth like you'd see at your nursery for plants, and throw that over them so they don't get exposed to that. Because I don't know if that would cause any harm. I could assume it could eventually, but I noticed that happening, and that's kind of something I did to solve that. So you'll come up with things on your own too, and you can always tell people about them. So I'm not sure if this puts you both on the spot, but have you changed your mind with anything we've talked about today, or have you learned anything in this conversation about how you rear or what your opinion is on rearing monarchs?
I have not changed my mind about anything. I'm still gonna do it. I'm a lifelong learner, and I love to learn new things, and I don't feel like there's ever anything that I will ever hit the ceiling on, that I will know everything that I can possibly know. So
Right.
that is my plan, to just keep learning and growing as I continue this little adventure, and I try to follow, reputable people like both of you, and, the organizations, so that I can just keep learning and do better.
I think I learned is from a lot of this conversation. Big takeaway I have is there's a lot of message boards that I have shied away from. I'm not even part of the Facebook revolution, and I've learned that was a very good idea. And that
yes, you're better off for it first.
Wild West out there with some message boards and things. I think if I wanted to, I think it shows that there's just from the experience that was brought up here, that there's a lot of opinions out there that could be maybe worth addressing a bit more too. If people have strong opinions that are this different, where are they getting their strong opinions from? Is that a topic worth exploring a little bit further to see what is out there for it? Because again, those detractments from rearing. Again, I don't think I have a strong argument why anybody should rear monarchs. Why they might want to, yes.
Mm-hmm.
But if there's arguments against it, I still have yet to hear the best one. I think a lot of them, like they fall into those categories of you could do it wrong. Well, okay, just make sure you're doing it right then as best as you can and following best practices as best you can. And then you've cleared away all of those. You might spread disease, you might spread OE. And if the other case is, the arguments in the category of hands off, let nature figure it out, again, we are already not in that category. We are already messing around with nature by the chemicals we're putting out there, the parking lots we're paving over, the reduction of habitat. So I don't think that argument really is there, and especially for the ones that aren't going to make it because of the non-adaptive choices of laying eggs where it's not going to work out. So I guess I'd be on the quest now, almost like, all right, bring it, internet. What is the best argument against, why we shouldn't rear? Because I think that that's important, that science is always inviting that we want to know what is the best evidence to make the best choices with. And science's strength really comes from the willingness to revise, to not be some school of thought out there that says, nope, this is true and it's true forever. We are the ones who are willing to say, give us that new evidence, that new information, and we'll take it into consideration. And we're going to try to revise and make the best choices for it. And so when I see that best argument, I do want to take it into consideration. I want to have that discussion, and I'm always willing to change my mind when presented with the correct evidence. I just have not seen that evidence yet. And I'm willing to consider it if I do.
Yeah, I wouldn't say anything from this conversation is going to make me change course in particular, but I would say like overall in the years I've been doing this, I've moved closer to the line of, the end of the spectrum, if you will, that nature does best. And that's mostly, it's not that it's not me being anti-rearing. It's also been what's like best for me personally. Like I used to go intentionally hunt out a certain number. I would go to a place whether it was in danger or not. And now I'm very intentional about where I source my wild eggs and caterpillars from and at what stage. And I think that has made me a better citizen scientist and also just a better rearer by not focusing on the quality or quantity, because I definitely started out that way. And it was only because I was trying to help as many as I could. And that's, if you're listening to this and you fall in that camp, it's okay. It's good that you care. But if you want to do the right thing, just keep an open mind. I echo both Annie and Rich here, where I say that I'm open to changing my mind and learning new things as well. So that I think that's the best that we can do for ourselves. And of course, there's so many other things that we could talk about. Maybe we'll have this conversation again. But for today, I think we're going to close it off there. So thank you both for joining. Before we sign off, can you both share where listeners can find you online?
Sure. We are Hot Mess Ranch on all the socials. But our content is mostly animals and our crazy adventures starting a ranch. There is I do put out some garden content, but it is mostly the animals.
And for me, the YouTube channel, if you want to get to it, youtube.com/Mr. Lund Science, all one word there. And that's where the content of the video is. If you want to stalk me, I suppose that's easier on Instagram, which is also Mr. Lund Science on Instagram. But I try to just keep it to those two. So that way, I know if I had other platforms, they would just be more unchecked inboxes. So I want to make sure to try to keep it. And furthermore, for any of the content that involves the monarchs, those are the two places.
Well, thank you for both joining today. This was a great conversation, as I expected. And thank you to all.
Thank you for having us. Definitely.
Anytime. So thank you to all of our listeners. And as always, you can follow us on social media. Those channels and other resources are in our link tree. That is going to be in the show notes, along with our email address, which is beesandreveryradio@gmail.com. You can ask us any questions on our social media or in our email. Just bear in mind, I am running the show solo right now. So if I get to you a little later, I apologize, but I am checking somewhat frequently. So that was our 4th summer special. I plan on doing at least 2 more before fall, and then we should have an update on the show's status at that time. So thank you again so much for listening, and thank you for planting native.